You got it tuned into the Zelos podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and this week I've got Russ Rausch in the house with me. He works with mental skills developments for players in the Miami Heat, as well as Miami Dolphins, and a whole bunch of other people and amazing athletes. So before we get underway with the conversation, I want to let you know that elections are open through the NSCA. In fact, there's an open seat for the board of directors, and I happen to be on that election ballot. So if you enjoy the things that we're doing here and you know of my background and what I'm all about, if you wouldn't mind going out and casting your vote for the NSCA board of directors, provided you're a member, that would be fantastic. Meanwhile, remember, Setanta College is the place to go for a Master's of Science in Sports Injuries and Return to Performance Management, as well as performance coaching, applied sports, biomechanics, and movement science. And they've also got a master's in applied sport and exercise psychology. And, one more thing. I've got a workshop coming up, and it's the middle of June, the weekend of June 15th. Here in Capitola, California, at my facility, we're going to be implementing foot wedges and finding out how it creates a chain reaction through the body to help you from rehab all the way to return to performance. Okay, now here's the show. Well, Russ, I just want to welcome you to the Zealous podcast, and we just want to get underway. But before we do, I have a little bone to pick. You don't know it yet, but being raised in Boston, I'm a Celtics fan. And what you're doing with the Heat right now, I wish you'd put it on the back burner and just tone it down a little bit, at least until this series is over. You guys came up to Boston a few nights back, and now when this airs, it'll be about a week and a half ago. And I'm really hoping that you are enjoying a little bit of I won't say retirement. You may be just going to focus on different things and let the Heat just take a break from the season, because I sure would like my team to advance. But whatever you're doing with them, man, I want to find out more, because it seems to be working. An 8-seed team going against the big dog #1 Celtics with the best record, and they are holding their own. So first, welcome to Zealous.
Thank you. And I just have to say, whatever the Heat have done and will do, if I have anything to do with it at all, it's tiny. And just a great organization, suppose an amazing coach. I mean, it's really a great organization. I'm really lucky to be a part of it. An interesting thing too, Joe Mazzulla is one of my best friends. So I've known him for several years. And so it's always a little emotional, last year when they played and this year when they played. And of course, I'm a Heat guy, like I'm a Heat coach. So of course, there's no question where my alliance is, but I care about Joe as well. So.
Well, you stretch yourself across more places than I think anybody realizes. Yeah, because you've worked with several professional sports teams. Right now, you've got the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, but you've also worked with the college ranks. I know Loyola Marymount basketball this past season. San Francisco 49ers, other teams, but you're also in the corporate world as well. So, which is something I would love to talk about, because basically, if you understand the essence of what you do, then it transcends or transfers over to all aspects of our existence. Is that accurate?
I think so. I think the mental side and what's happening in the brain and body, and I like the combination of the brain and body. I think of it as one, which I love what you do related to that as well. But yeah, I think it relates to everything in life.
So I love starting off with just finding out how people explored or discovered their passion and continued that journey toward where they are now. So if you don't mind, was just looking back in your history, was there a time early on where suddenly your interest was piqued by mental, emotional aspects of life, and how you saw a transformation within yourself or someone else and say, you know what, I like that. I need to follow that more? Or was it just kind of like happenstance? How did this all come about?
So it was more negative. A small town kid from Kansas, first one to go to college in my family. I wasn't even planning on going to college. I ended up going kind of last minute, did pretty well. I'll fast forward all the way into my early 40s. I'm about to turn 60 next month. Early 40s, I'm in Chicago. I'm in the trading industry. I'm doing pretty well financially. I've traveled the world, a lot of things that I never thought I would do, and yet I'm pretty miserable. just don't enjoy my life, have trouble sleeping. I'm running things over in my head all the time. I'm beating myself up all the time, thinking about the past and the future. Now, I'm not dysfunctional. I'm pretty highly functional, but I'm pretty miserable. So that it wasn't like a positive thing. It was like, I need to do something about this to help myself. And at the time, I was in the hedge fund industry. I was the chief operating officer, and I'd met Scott Podsednik, if you remember Scotty Pods from the White Sox. And those that don't remember him, he won a World Series. He married a Playmate model. He had a walk-off home run in the World Series. He was on Saturday Night Live. He had Oprah's cell phone, kind of everything you ever wanted to do as a kid. Scotty had done it all, and yet he kind of felt the same way I did. And that was really shocking to me. So this all kind of came together at the same time, which started me down the road of, why are people not happy? Why are people having what I would call not a great life experience, even when they're doing great things, even literally living their dream? And so that was the impetus that got me down the road of trying to understand that. And I always thought, hey, it's all external. You got to change your external environment. And a couple of videos, I watched 2 videos that kind of changed my life, which made me shift that this is not an external thing. This is an internal thing.
What were they? What were those 2 videos?
The first one was really unusual. It's a guy, Dr. Stephen Mayer, who's a neuroscientist at the University of Colorado. I haven't checked him out for a few years. But basically, he's this real heavy-duty neuroscientist guy. He's not into social media or books or anything. He loves to be in the lab studying the brain. And he had this video, like 1,000 people have watched it. Nobody cares about this video. But what he talked about was how neurotransmitters in particular, and he showed through studies through mice, he could yoke them up and see what was going on with their neurotransmitters, caused anxiety. So anxiety isn't the external world so much, it's the chemicals that get projected, the neurotransmitters get projected, and that can all be different for different mice or different people, depending on how your brain operates. And then he would do certain things that would change the neurotransmissions. And so that was like, damn, that makes a lot of sense to me why I'm unhappy, because these chemicals are making me unhappy or pissed off or resentful or worried or whatever, all the things I was experiencing. That really shifted me to how can I change the way the chemicals are flowing in my body, because that's the number one determinant of how I feel. And you think about the angriest you've ever been, the saddest, the most distraught, the happiest. Those are all the result of these chemicals. They're amazingly strong. So that was the first video that shifted my mind that this is internal. And the second one was a TED Talk that millions of people have seen, and that's My Stroke of Insight by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. You're nodding your head.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I've seen that one before.
So she talks about left hemisphere, right hemisphere, and when she lost the left hemisphere, she felt nirvana. She was in the present moment. People are always talking about be in the now, mindfulness, be in the present moment. Well, the right hemisphere can only be in the present moment. That's all it can do. And so that's the other thing that really struck me is if I can be in my right hemisphere and change the chemical flow in my brain and body, that's going to affect how I feel about my life more than any external thing by far. And so those are the 2 things that really got me down the road of this is internal, not external. And that set me off on this course of just on my own studying and trying to figure this out.
That's interesting. So you take more of the biological model of psychology, I guess you'd say, right? You're looking at neurotransmitters, you're looking at hormones and chemicals and coursing through, and not the necessarily coming from the heart centric that I've often encountered with mental skills coaches and psychologists for that matter. So I imagine you being a number cruncher guy, hedge fund, you needed something that was firmly planted with both feet on the ground, something that I could actually kind of tactilely get a sense of. So that made sense to you, but how has that evolved? Has that matured in a way, or has it stayed just rooted in the understanding of neurotransmitters and brain science, or what? Where is it now for you?
That's always my go-to. Because I think it's the most effective. If you can get into the right hemisphere, or let's say that you can work your hemispheres the way you want to, you have more agency over those, and you have agency over your neurotransmitters, your internal state. That's everything. Now, on the other hand, there is this kind of heart, soul, spirit, kind of thing. And that doesn't resonate with me as much, but I do believe in it, and I'm trying to evolve a little bit more there, especially as you can relate to people, to try to relate to people who don't think about the world like I do. So I always go back to that, and I find that that works with a high percentage of people, whether it's athletes, coaches, business people, because it makes so much sense and it works, and you can actually get results pretty quickly. If you tell people, hey, you need to lead with, be vulnerable and lead with your heart, or things like that. I'm not saying those are bad, but those don't work for everyone, number one. And number two, those could take a while to even understand what that means and get results, where these things, you can get results literally in minutes. You can show people changes in the way they feel and the way they respond. So I think it's a combination of both. I lean one way, but I also realize I need to get better on the other, is the way I would say it.
Okay, can you give me an example of how to change the activation of the right versus left hemisphere of my brain in a matter of minutes?
Yes. Well, number one, let's just talk about how to activate your right hemisphere. So the right
Okay.
hemisphere, as Dr. Jill talks about, it's all about right here, right now. There is no me. I'm a part of everything else. If you go back and watch that video, she talked about her hand was blending in with all the other things. She was just seeing molecules. And so she was a part of the whole universe, is what it felt like to her. And nothing needed to change. Everything was great the way it was. So like nirvana. And so how did that happen for her? How can you get there? Well, she lost her left hemisphere. So how can we get there? We teach 3 ways to get there. One is through breathing. That's maybe the most powerful way. You can use your breath. You can also use your vision in particular ways, and you can use sound. So if we did some heavy breathing, we call it power breathing. People call it Tumo breathing, Wim Hof breathing. If you did that for 2 minutes, now it doesn't work for everybody. Some people that they don't handle that very well. But if you get used to doing that, you do that for a couple minutes. You look at a couple pictures, or even look at outside in a beautiful landscape, and you try to just be pure observation. I'm just going to observe shapes, colors, objects. And then you have certain sound frequencies coming through. You'll start to access your right hemisphere, and all of a sudden you aren't thinking, you aren't mind wandering. You're not worried about whatever you were worried about. You get to this higher level. I don't really want to call it higher level like it's better, but you get a different perspective on whatever's going on as you get into that right hemisphere. So that's a process people can do in 5 to 10 minutes. Now, again, it's a skill they have to acquire over time, but most people, I would say 70% of people can get there in 1 5 to 6 minute exercise.
And is this what you bring into the sports teams? Is this one of the exercises or activities? I'm sure there's more, obviously, but how did you tap in? I guess you can answer that question, but also a follow up would be, how did you get your foot in the door of the professional sports world from the corporate world?
Pure happenstance. So when I started doing this, I knew I needed help with training. I'd never done that before. So I tapped into someone who I'd worked with before. Her name is Mary Beth Quinn, dear friend of mine. Turns out her brother is Dan Quinn, the new head coach of the Washington Commanders. So at the time, this is way back when he was in Seattle, defensive coordinator for Pete. And so she introduced me to him, and Pete Carroll was working with Mike Gervais and doing some mental stuff. And so he was really interested in it. And I met with him, and he really liked it. And I started working with him. And then he got the job with the Atlanta Falcons. And that was my entree into pro sports. And then I met Spo kind of through that relationship a couple years into it. And that it all came from that.
Wow. And is there much difference between working with the executive world and the sports world?
Not in terms of the content. All the content's exactly the same. We just use different examples. I don't think there's a big difference. I think about, people ask me that all the time, working with young athletes or working with executives or whoever it is. I've kind of worked with all types. There's not a big difference. You're just trying to relate to them mainly by using examples they can relate to. Everything else is the same, because most of us are struggling with the same thing. We're thinking about the past. We're worried about the future. Our self-talk's not great. We're not enjoying our life. We have this bad life experience. And so most people can relate to all that, and they want to fix it. And so it's very similar.
And so it seems like your approach, as you have just explained it, is being in the now, being present, so to speak, and not necessarily kind of looking back over your shoulder to see the blocks that were created in your past, the stories that we told ourselves. You're not necessarily getting into that. You're just going to be, okay, here's what we're going to do right here, right now, and with this approach, it will help to address all of the things that keep us from achieving the goals that we set forth. Is that right?
Let me take a step back,
Yeah.
the way we look at it. And also I want to bring in the left hemisphere. We talked about a lot about the right. So the left hemisphere is almost the opposite. It's about the past, mostly what went wrong, the future, mostly what could go wrong. You notice that's what thought patterns are mostly about. Athletes can have a great game. They have two bad plays and they replay that shit over and over and over. And we do it too. Like humans do that. And then a lot of great things can happen in our future, but we don't tend to focus and stay up at night thinking about that. We think about what could go wrong. So the left hemisphere does that. It's also very narcissistic and self-absorbed. It's all about me. How am I getting treated? What are my political views? What do I want to happen this election? Is my lunch the way I want it? What's happening with my team? And it also wants things to be better, different, or wants more. A lot of people call this the ego. And a lot of people are down on it. And for the reason that if your whole life is all about the past and what went wrong and the future and what went wrong, and it's all about me and I want more, well, life's going to not feel very good. And that's why it does for most people. But it's not the fault of the left hemisphere. That's its job. And you think about it, it's very important. The only way to learn is to learn from your mistakes. And we should prepare for what could go wrong in the future. And if we cared about everybody else in the world except for ourselves and our family, our teams, that makes no sense. And if we thought everything was great, well, we'd never change anything. So the left hemisphere has a very important job and it's very good at it. Unfortunately, it's running the whole show. Most people don't know there's a right hemisphere. And they also don't know how to work with the left hemisphere. We tend to either get lost in it or we're suppressing it or fighting it or thinking it's a bad thing. And one of the things I loved about your interview with Graham or your podcast with Graham was he was talking about thoughts and emotions, not trying to change them, change your self-talk or getting caught up in any of it. I agree with all that. And I would say even go a step further and you lean into it because you realize that part of the brain is doing a very valuable job for you. So you're not fighting it. You're seeing it for what it is. This is what its job is. So you take it at face value for what it's supposed to do. And that changes the way you feel about it. So if I'm worried about coming on this podcast, instead of suppressing that, I would go, yeah, well, because I want to do a good job. It makes sense that I feel that way. My left hemisphere is getting me to feel that way. And so I don't fight it. I don't get lost in it. I go, basically, yeah, thanks. That's a good point. I do want to do well. Am I prepared? What do I need to do? Whatever. Like I'm working with it. And then I can move forward because it's not going to keep talking once you're acknowledging it. It's like a person. If you're trying to coach me up and tell me something when I'm lifting and I won't listen to you, you're going to get irritated with me. If I would just say, hey, Rocky, no, tell me, I want to do it. Like, tell me what I'm doing wrong. You would calm down and just give me the information. That's my analogy for the left brain. The left brain's trying to coach us up. We don't need to fight it, take it at face. And it's not right about everything either. And so it just has an opinion. It has a perspective. It's very valuable, but that's all it is. And then the right hemisphere is a totally different perspective. And I'm sitting in the middle. It's my job to navigate the two. It's kind of like I'm the president. This is my chief of staff, and this is my wise board member. Both are valuable, and I need to take the information and make decisions based on it.
Okay, so when that voice starts creeping in, self-doubt or concern, fear, you're saying lean into it, acknowledge it, and obviously don't ignore it, but almost be grateful to the awareness of, okay, this is a valid point. Or maybe it's just something, maybe it's not correct, maybe it's incorrect, but it's something that is still here that I need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I'll give you a specific example. So I presented for the Heat training staff, or not staff, the whole coaching staff and their larger staff before the season started, and they split me up between, I went last thing and I was going first thing. So I went last thing and I was not good. You know, I had like an hour session and I was maybe a 6 out of 10, 5 out of 10 for me. And that's not what I want to do. And so it had a bad deal. Now, was it as bad as I thought it was? You know, who knows? But like, I was not happy. So afterwards, you know, that would have crushed me, you know, before I learned all this. So now I'm feeling what I'm feeling. I'm having a thought pattern. I feel it in my body. I'm not fighting it. It makes sense. So it's basically my coach now saying, that's not good, you know? And so I lean into it. I feel the feelings. I feel the chemicals flowing through my body. I listen to the thought pattern. I acknowledge it. I breathe into it. And then you evaluate, and we have a whole process for stepping through to do this. And then you evaluate, okay, what's true? Okay, it's probably not as bad as I thought it was. And whether it was or not, what's the way forward? And the way forward is like, get your shit together, try to have a good night, and do better tomorrow. That's all I can control at that point. So we call it expect the expected. We have 3 steps to walk through this. Number 1, expect the expected. You're going to have bad outings, you're not going to do as well as you want all the time. And when you don't do as well as you want, you're going to feel a certain way about it. And you want that. Am I supposed to be happy that I sucked? Am I supposed to not care? It's supposed to be uncomfortable. So I expect it. And then we have a second step. Then how do I deal with the chemical? And it's through an acronym SEE, which stands for separate, embrace, evaluate. Separate, I'm having a chemical, neurochemical, and also electrical experience in my body. And so I separate and say, okay, this is an experience. I embrace it, lean into it, listen to my coach, my inner coach, and then I evaluate what's true and what do I do about it. And then the third step is controlling the controllable. Can't go back and redo it. Can't, you know, I just got to focus on what I can control. And so that's how I walked through that. And that was, you know, I've been doing this stuff for years and I needed that 6 months ago, whenever it was. And so that's a process I would go through. And so it's trying to answer your question, how I relate to that left brain. And then I can also breathe, use my vision to get into my right hemisphere. And your right hemisphere tends to say, oh, it wasn't as bad as you thought, you know, or whatever. Like it has a different perspective. We're going to be good. You're going to be good. You're going to do fine tomorrow. And so instead of me trying to do self-talk, I'm working with my brain, and then my own brain's communication to me changes. And it becomes not all positive, but I would call it very constructive. And then the next morning, I did one of the best ones I've maybe done in a long time. Now, there's no guarantee that was going to happen, but before I'd had no chance of getting there. And the other thing I'd say is we had a cocktail party that night or whatever, we got together, and I would have maybe not gone or just moped around before. But now, because I went through this process, it's like you go and you show up and control the controllable. And so that's a process that I really like. So it isn't changing my self-talk, which isn't usually not helpful, like arguing with yourself. Instead, you just listen to the left hemisphere, connect to the right, do some breathing exercises, and then that tends to get you right, and then you go back at it.
And so these practices, obviously, just like shooting baskets, the more you do, the more you can correct little nuances, the more you can become almost, you know, you train it from the top down so it becomes instinctive. Is this the same thing that you would encourage students, athletes, coaches, and so on to follow through with? I mean, how frequently do you yourself do these exercises? And I'm sure there's kind of an optimal frequency. What might that be?
I think the big thing is learning practices you can take into the moment in real time, which is what I was just explaining. So yes, you need to learn these concepts, but you can't really practice them. You just have to use them. So if a person's struggling with performance anxiety, which a lot of people do, expect the expected. That's not unusual. And feeling that way is fine. And then you also understand, what is performance anxiety? Well, it's really moving into a sympathetic stress response. Everything's changing internally. blood flow is changing, where your resources are changing, energy is changing, all of that's changing. So when you realize what's happening, you expect it, you separate. This is a process I'm going through. Why is it happening? Because it's trying to help me. It's trying to give me all the resources I need to be at my very best. So embrace it, breathe into it, evaluate, control the controllable. So these are things that no matter what scenario you came up with, I'm fighting with my wife, I'm having trouble with a child, I'm mad in traffic. You could walk through those 3 steps, incorporate the right brain, and then that would help you through that situation. And every time you do that, you're changing the way your brain is going to process these things in the future. So now I don't get huge performance anxiety anymore like I used to. I get something, and sometimes it's higher than others, depending on what's going on. But I don't get completely locked up like I used to because I've put this into practice, done it over and over again. It doesn't take forever. You take a couple months of doing that, and then it changes the way your body responds to the external stimulus.
This would also require a level of awareness in the moment to say, like, okay, I recognize what's going on, and now I'm going to follow these steps. I jokingly sometimes say that the level of my spirituality can be judged on the driving ability of those around me. You know, I'm in traffic and I am lit up. This person's moving too fast. That one's moving too slow. This person's trying to cut in front of me, and I am in it. Russ. I am just like there's edges and ridges on my steering wheel, not because of design, but I think because of my grip strength on it. And then something happens where I just almost have to pause and laugh, going, "Oh, okay, that's a moment of awareness." I'm like, "Oh, okay, and all I have to do is follow the car in front of me. I'm going to go where I'm going. I'm fine." And that happens. But how do you encourage, how do you coach, how do you teach people to recognize when they're at that point? Okay, we're going to embrace the left, we're going to breathe for the right. How do you do that?
Yeah, just teach people. I think most people, what I notice, it's funny you say that about driving. I'm a psychopath when I drive too. It's funny, it's out of all the things I've done and changed, and I'm so much better at, I would say, the big things with my kids and getting angry. I really don't, all of that's like no big deal. If I lost a client or whatever, traffic still gets me a little bit. So it's just funny how powerful it is. But to answer your question, most people know the stuff that's hanging them up. They know when they get angry. They know when their self-talk they know when their mind goes crazy, which is almost all the time for a lot of people because they've not, that's the way it was for me. Going back to before I learned all this stuff, like this was nonstop. And so for me, and people tell you, oh, don't get upset about traffic. It's not controllable. And they tell you stuff and it all makes sense, but it doesn't change anything. It doesn't, in fact, it makes it worse because now you feel like, well, what's my problem? And I see this all the time in sports where people will say, hey, don't get mad about what you can't control. Instead of telling people it's normal to get mad. It's normal. Graham talked about this a lot, which I loved a lot. It's like, it's normal to feel like, it's normal to feel all of this, but then here's a process to walk through. So I think it's pretty easy for people to be aware. Now, of course, when you start learning something, you're going to blow right through it. You're just going to get mad at someone. You're going to, oh shit, I totally forgot I didn't do any of that stuff. But you start incorporating it. So there is some training, there is some repetition, of course, in the training to get there. I think that's what you're saying. It isn't just like, hey, here's the 3 steps, go do it. Of course, you got to train. And I believe in breathing exercise. I believe in meditation. I believe in mindfulness practices. I believe in all of that. And it's a combination of things that balance the brain and get you to where you can do this. So it isn't just as simple as here's the 3 steps, go get it. But those 3 things are really powerful because you can use them on anything and it helps you in the moment and it helps you build mental strength over time.
So obviously you don't have a cookie cutter approach, and you're going to have people that will be attracted by some aspects of what you offer, and somebody will not find that as attractive. How do you Do you have an assessment process like we do? Somebody walks in the gym, you're going to do a needs analysis. What are they looking for, and where are their strengths, weaknesses, so to speak, and develop a program based on that. How do you work with individual athletes compared to teams?
I actually am pretty cookie cutter. And then I can go above that. So the best way to describe it, you being a strength and conditioning person, if somebody came in and they had zero fitness, let's say you had 20 people with zero fitness, you're going to kind of start with the basics. You're not trying to take a person and make them faster or quicker or more powerful. You're just saying, okay, we got to get you leveled up to the basics. And so most people mentally just need to be leveled up, almost everybody. And then once you get them to a certain level, I think certain athletes, some of them can't do it in a game or when the moment's big. So in other words, they struggle in the big moments. Others are almost the opposite. They can't practice. They can't really do it unless there is a big moment. And so there are individual differences, and that we have to come with or address at some point. But really, at first, you're just getting everybody leveled up. And I will back up a little, and there is an assessment we do, which is very interesting, and we call it, I talked about life experience. How are you experiencing your life? So wrap your mind around this. We've asked over 6,000 people this question and gotten the data back. We have them break a typical day, all your waking hours in a typical day, into 4 categories. What percentage of the day is stressful, annoying, or frustrating? Think about that. Then what percentage of the day is monotonous, boring, means to an end? You're doing stuff you don't want to do, but you have to do. The third one is, what percentage of the day do you spend doing escape activities? That could be drinking, smoking, social media, video games, watching TV. We all do something or a variety of these things. It's just when you shut it off, I don't want to think anymore, like I just want to turn it off. What percentage is spent doing that? And the last one, almost a catch-all, what percentage of the day feels good, but you can't count the escape activities? So if you remember the first 3, and this is what we're trying to measure, what percentage of the day is stressful, annoying, monotonous, or you're escaping? Do you want to guess what the average result is for what percentage of the day gets to those 3?
I would say the average work day, which is 8 hours, so 1/3 of the day, 33%.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is, out of all your waking hours in one day, if you're awake 16 hours in a day, I'm having the percentage. Out of 100%.
Somewhere between 65 to 75%.
It's close. It ends up being about 80.
Damn.
So 80%. And you would think, man, that would really depend on who you're talking to. Like, what kind of job do they have? How stressful? What's their merit? It doesn't make any difference. A pro athlete, if I went into your local Santa Cruz high school and we got enough kids, it would end up about 80%. I mean, it might be 75, it might be 85. We did the teachers, it'd be that. If we went to stay-at-home parents, we went to professional athletes, it always ends up about the same. Why? Because the left brain's going to produce that. The past, the future, it's all about me. I want more. Neurotransmitters are flying. It doesn't matter if you're Tyreek Hill or some kid at Santa Cruz High School or you or me. It's going to produce that very predictably. So that's what we measure. And then after our program, we measure that again. And that changes pretty dramatically. So the feel good part is 20% because the rest is 80. That goes to 40 to 50%. So you're changing the way people feel about their typical day. And it isn't just like village idiot happiness. Like, you're just way better. Like, you're way more in the moment. You're not overthinking everything. You're not replaying everything. You're not worried about everything. Doesn't mean you don't have episodes of that. You're still 50% is escape, frustration, and monotony, but it's 50%, not 80%. And that's after about 60 days on the program. And so that's the main result that we measure. And then we know a lot of other things, good things come out of that. I can focus, my confidence is up, I can sleep better, I'm not replaying everything. So that's really how we measure. And then we get people up to a certain level. Then, yeah, we're going to work on, this guy needs to be, or gal needs to be tougher. in big moments. They need to be more of a killer instinct, or they need to be a better teammate. So we can work on individual things, but the first part is getting everybody leveled up.
I get a better sense of that now. So you've got a mental fitness program rather than a physical fitness program. It's got the basic fundamentals that are going to get all of the foundational pieces in place. And as that starts to build, then we're going to have more or less, I won't say better brain chemistry, but more ideal balance between the hemispheres to the degree where now they're not going to be escaping the monotony of their life, and they'll find excitement somewhere in between the hours of monotony.
Yeah, less stress, less frustration, less annoyance, and a lot of less monotony. And then, of course, you're escaping less. A lot of escaping is trying to get rid of all that. And so it doesn't mean you don't do that. You do all of that. It's just the proportion changes pretty dramatically. And now you're enjoying your life way more than you used to. And I would argue performing at a higher level.
Wow, very cool. Okay, so let's just take a team setting. I'm imagining a schedule, a training schedule, if you will. We've got off season, we've got preseason, in season, and like the Heat right now, postseason. Right? They're in the playoffs. So, do you have a like a calendar of of potential, I would say, exercise and drills based on where they are in the season? Do you start off in the preseason, get them all primed up, and now they're in season? Here are the things we're going to do for your mental fitness. And now we're in the playoffs. We need to stay on our game, and here's the things we're going to do there. Do you have like a periodized program? I guess that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think it's analogous to what you do on the physical side. So a lot of people on the mental side want you to come in when the games start. It's like, hey, let's lift weights, because the games are starting. And so I love the front load. Better to start all this before the season starts. And so you're really getting them up to a certain level. You're teaching them a lot of concepts and they're starting to practice them. And I love working things into the daily schedule. And I'm friends with all the strength and conditioning people whenever I can, because I want them to be my partner in implementing, because they're there all the time and I'm not. And they're touching the players all the time. And they usually have a lot of influence and trust. And so I try to work it into that. So I try to get into a certain level. Then we try to put together a program that just fits into the fabric of what the team does. It's part of what they do. Now, everybody I work with does this a little differently. Marquette is probably the best example of a full integration of putting this into the fabric of everything they do. And so what we want it to be for the players is like strength and conditioning. It isn't like, oh, I got to go do my VP. It's one more thing I got to do. It's like, no, I'm going to lift weights. And my VP is going to be baked into everything. And the beauty of the stuff that I have them do, most of it's kind of in the moments. You're just reminding them, but the things that we have them do that are more like exercises don't take near as long as strength and conditioning. 5 minutes here, 3 minutes here. You can get it done pretty quick.
So,
and to answer your question, so like during the season, it's all, and then the playoffs, it's all the same. It's like it doesn't matter what port you're in. Now, some people maybe need to revisit things in the playoffs because everything amps up, but it's all the same process.
So Marquette, of course, they made it into the NCAA tournament. They went pretty far, Sweet 16. Did they make the Elite Eight?
Unfortunately,
Just shy of it. Okay.
Shy.
But they got Sweet 16. So they went up there. So what was it? You say they do it a little differently. What is it that they do differently? That they've structured it as a team, or how does it look? What does it look like?
Well, with a lot of teams, and I think your other mental training guys that you talk to would agree with this. I mean, a lot of it is like, here it is, players want to do it. So it's very optional. It's not really baked in most places. And that's typically what's gone on now. In college basketball, I've gotten to the point where I can completely now put it into the fabric, like strength and conditioning is in the fabric. It isn't like, hey, if you guys want to lift weights, here's Rocky, you can talk to him if you want. It isn't like that. So that's where VP's gone. In college. In pro, I'm still trying. It isn't. I'm not quite there yet. I'm I'm making my way there in basketball and football, NFL and NBA.
Got it. Got it. So yeah, it's up to the players whether they want to so-called drink the Kool-Aid, I guess you'd say, on the professional side. But let's talk about VP for a minute because in on video here, there's VP after your name, and that doesn't stand for vice president. Let's tell me a little bit about the business that you've created and who are the key players with you.
Yeah, that's our logo right here. Vision Pursue. And it's interesting because it sounds like a goal-oriented, a dream-oriented vision that you're pursuing, but really what you're pursuing is enjoying your life more. And we're much more focused, like a lot of people in sports psychology, although I'm not a sports psychologist, but on the process versus the result. Get the mind right, get the activity right, get the process right, and let the results happen. So the vision is really enjoying your life. That's really the vision, and letting the results, whatever they are, come from that. And so that's the Vision Pursue. And, it's a company, but it's really myself and my business partner, John McGraw, and another business partner, Matt Andreeses, who's on the technology side. So the three of us have been working on it. And then everything else, there aren't any other employees in the company. We just have W-2 and part-time employees for administrative things. So it really is John and I going out and doing the training.
And I take it, well, it's the field's wide open for you, shall we say? It's a hot market, so to speak. There's more focus on the mental aspects, potentially more than ever before. I mean, I know we've had some major names out there talking about improving your life and reprogramming and so on, whether it's Tony Robbins, Jordan Peterson, Est, and before that it was something else and so on. But do you find that there's more acceptance, more openness toward looking at the mental aspects of life, and the word mental doesn't have some type of negative connotation like it may have 20, 30 years ago?
It's changed dramatically in the 7 years I've been doing it. And I saw a big shift after COVID, kind of during COVID. And
How
also,
so?
well, I think people really struggled. I think all of a sudden it was out there that many people were struggling. And I think it just showed what was already there. It just exposed the problem. The problem had always been there, but it really got exposed, and people got to the point like, I need to do something about this. The other thing that's happened is all these podcasts with all this information out there. I look at the Huberman podcast and many others, which I think the Huberman podcast is great. And there was a lot of great podcasts. So now there's all this information, and it's been demystified, some of it. So something like breathing exercises, meditation, which may have seen, or cold exposure, or circadian rhythm, all things I believe in. Nobody even knew what a lot of that was or thought it was funny. Well, now, by the way, I've trained NFL rookies for the last 7 years on one team or another. And I can tell you this year, when I trained last season, you ask the question, how many of you are meditating? A third of the room raises their hand. How many of you are getting morning light? A third of the room. How many of you are doing breathing? Like, where if I would have done that 5 years ago, it would have been almost nobody. Either they weren't doing it or they would have been ashamed to say they were. And so it's changed dramatically. And I think what's happening now is almost the opposite. There's so much information out there, podcasts, Instagram, and everything else, that people are kind of confused. So now it really becomes, what is the best protocol to get the result? Because you could spend 5 hours a day trying to implement all the stuff you learn or hear online. And so I think a lot of it now is people are open. It's almost like you've got to move them away from whatever they've thought, or make them think about something a little different, and then try to get them on a protocol that they can sustain. Like, what's something you can do no matter what, no matter how hard it gets or how busy you get. And so I'm really focused on that. That's the bigger thing, much more than, oh, I got to convince you that the mental matters. And like, I never, that doesn't happen anymore. Almost never.
Yeah, the proof's in the pudding, obviously, with that. But okay, you bring up something also that I try as hard as I can to avoid answering questions about minimal effective dose. Meaning that if somebody asks me, hey, how often do I have to work out to see this occur? Like, really what they're asking is, what is the least amount I actually have to do in order to reach my goals? Like that, I just refuse to answer questions like that. So I don't want to pose the same thing to you, Russ, but I'm curious, in your experience of doing this, is there an ideal amount of frequency and duration where you find that anything beyond that is good, but you not necessarily need to do that, and you definitely shouldn't do it this infrequently?
I actually like that question, and I really orient everything towards that uh, because I have to. I've been forced to, but I actually believe in it now that I think about it. Because when you're dealing with people in general, but I think about pro athletes in particular, especially NFL football players. I mean, they are just college football, basketball players, and they're scheduled to the hilt, and so you can't ask them to do a bunch of extra stuff. In fact, the other thing I hate is this guilt trip of I'm never doing enough. There's all these videos about Steph Curry gets in it, Kobe get up at 3 a.m. and do whatever and like get a million shots up. And now everybody feels like, oh, I'm not doing enough. So I'm always fighting against that. I'm trying to say, no, this is enough. You can hang your hat on this. And if you want to do more, that's great. But that's extra credit. Like you should feel good about that, not like I'm doing all this extra shit and I'm never doing enough. So I love the minimum effective. And I also think it's, at least in what I do, it's real. And so, I get it down to 10 minutes a day. And I think that absolutely is enough. And now you got to learn the information. So there's some investment you got to put on up front. But once you understand what you're doing, 10 minutes a day, absolutely get the job. And not, when I say 10 minutes a day, that's 5 days a week. And then there's some other things maybe you do. But like we're talking about less than 2 hours a week for sure to get the job done.
Okay, and is there a time of day when the brain is more susceptible to change that you prefer to have them do it in the morning, middle of the day, before they go to bed?
Well, there's different things I have them do. I mean, part of what we haven't talked about, I'm big on what I call biological essentials, things that the body needs. Circadian rhythm is one of them. And so I'm really big on getting morning light, eating windows, what I call sleeping windows. Those don't, the morning light takes a few minutes, but everything, none of the rest of that takes any time. So I'm trying to get people to think about getting their circadian rhythm right, because that may be the most important thing, at least I think, for health, period. If your circadian rhythm's messed up, I don't care what you're eating, I don't care how much you're working out, like you're going to be deficient. So that's something that I get people doing that takes almost no time. It's just a habit. They don't have to be perfect at it. So that happens different times of the day. In terms of some of the other mental things, again, a lot of them, you're just applying them through the day as things happen to you. When it comes to breathing exercises, meditation, that sort of stuff, there may be a better time than others. I think the best time is when you're going to do it and when you can fit it in. So I really focus more on that. And again, at least with athletes, we're trying to bake it in. That's why, with the college basketball teams I work with, the breathing practices, the meditation, all of that is built in. Before we lift weights, we breathe a certain way. When we come out of a timeout or a break in the practice, we have certain breathing patterns. We meditate right before, right after film or whatever. If you can bake it in, that's really what I like to do. Otherwise, time of day doesn't matter to me.
Right on. I appreciate that. How do you address the travel schedule for whether it's college or pros? I mean, college is going to be a lot more localized, where professional teams are going to be dealing with at least three different time zones, and you're trying to maintain a certain circadian rhythm. I mean, are you working with a sports scientist? Or are you just saying, hey, how do you do it? How do you deal with, say, the Heat or the Dolphins or whomever you worked with?
So I really like to stick to the basics, which is, you get morning light within 90 minutes of the sun coming up, and keep all your eating within 12 hours, and don't eat the 12 hours overnight. Stop eating a couple hours before you go to bed, and then try to go to bed and get up at the same time in an 8-hour span. So if you can do that all the times you can, and then you can't because of a travel or whatever, then no big deal. Like I look at it like keep putting deposits in the bank, and then you could take withdrawals. And if you want to go on vacation and blow it out and stay out late and drink and eat and whatever, no problem. You do it guilt-free. You've built up all this reservoir by doing it right when you can do it. So I really focus on do it when you can do it. Keep it simple. You don't have to be perfect. Pay attention to it. And then people see the results. And so then you really kind of get addicted in a good way to doing it the right way. And then when you want to deviate from it, no problem.
Fantastic. Okay. So you work beyond teams and individual athletes. With VP, if people wanted to utilize your products and services or find out more information, I just want to give a little opportunity here to dive into that a little bit more. What's the best way to go about that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think the best way is just email me at russ@visionpursue.com. russ@visionpursue.com. You can also just go to our website and there's a place where you can contact us, and I would get it there as well. I think that's the best way. Now, we're really oriented not towards working with individuals, but working with teams. We have a team, the way our pricing structure works and everything else, it's not hourly, it's like based on the team. Doesn't mean I won't do individual things, but it's expensive for an individual, and so I rarely do that. But for teams, and the other thing we're it's hard. We're busy. We're at capacity. So the other thing not that I can't take on a new client, but it's not easy. But I think the other thing we're working on is a digital program to try to put everything I'm talking about into a digital system where coaches, players, and human beings. I mean, I'm not doing this for people to win games. I'm glad they do, and I want people to win games and have better performance. I'm really doing this to try to help human beings no matter what they're doing. And so my big passion is to get this digital program done so we can help as many people as we can and really get this out there in a digital platform that's really affordable and very accessible.
And how far off into the future are we talking?
It'll be done this year for sure. Like, we're working on it very diligently right now. In fact, I'm like script writing all the time to try to get the scripts done and then shoot the videos. And so 2024 for sure, I would say probably third, fourth quarter.
Right on. Okay, then I've got one final question before I'm going to ask you about like your social media contacts and links so I can put it in the description. But within the realm of professional sports, the different medical and training staff, those coaches often have a network within the league. For instance, athletic trainers, they coordinate with each other for an annual conference in most of the major sports. Strength coaches do the same. What's it like for the mental skills, mental performance, whatever title people are using for your field? Do you have that same networking within the NBA or NFL?
I don't. So, not being a sports psychologist, I'm not kind of part of that group and that network. So I'm not really tied into that. Now, the Miami Heat have hired a guy, Dr. Derek Anderson, who's a clinical psychologist and a sports psychologist. He's a great guy. This is his first season this year, so I coordinate with him. The Utah Jazz, who I work with, is Dr. Ronald Kimmons. So I'm starting to develop a network of people, and Dr. Ian Knoll at Dartmouth is somebody I've been connected with for years. So I have a small network, but I'm not tied into anything bigger. I'm tied more into the head coaches that I work with, strength and conditioning people, the athletic trainers on some of the staff. So it's more like my network of people with my customers is more of what has worked out for me, because I just don't have that background.
Got it. But you, at the same time, don't feel like you're the only boat out on the sea sailing off, right? You've got a fleet of others around you. You're surrounded by other mental skills professionals within the league itself. It's just a matter of time before maybe you guys connect with one another.
Yeah, that could be. And I think in baseball, it's a lot more mature. I did some work in baseball several years ago with the Mariners. And so at baseball, they have a lot of great mental skills, sports psych people. It's way more advanced there, I think, than the NFL for sure, and in the NBA for sure. But it's all kind of growing. I think it's all very fledgling and growing, but there's some really great people out there. Again, I was really impressed with Graham when I saw that podcast. So yeah, it's growing, and I'd like to get more connected, more networking like that.
Well, I personally, I'm really happy that we connected. And I want to thank you for your time here. I will put the connection on your LinkedIn page in the description below. But can people follow you on, say, Instagram, or for those of us over 55, approaching 60, we still are on Facebook? Do you do anything there?
LinkedIn only, really. Now, as we do the digital program, we're going to try to engage with social media, but like I think we have handles for that. We don't do anything like that. I'm really bad at all that, unfortunately.
No,
So
no problem. I'll make
I
sure
appreciate
your
it.
website. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I appreciate you. I can't thank you enough for your time.
Well, one last thing I want to say is I just bought your book, Return to Center. Something that I've been doing lately, I've been an avid weightlifter my whole life, even though I maybe don't look like it. But lately, I really had some back mobility issues. And so like I've really focused on what your book is apparently about. So I'm really psyched to get it and really excited to learn more about what you do because I need it.
Well, thank you. And if there's anything I can do to help further that exploration, you know how to get a hold of me. So, yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks, Rocky.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Zelos podcast. I want to thank Russ for coming on, as well as the Miami Heat for giving us permission to do this, and Miami Dolphins for that matter. And be sure next week we'll be having another amazing guest just like Russ. In the meantime, get onto that website of the NSCA, nsca.com. Cast your vote. There's quite a few items on there that need your approval or your opinion. So be sure to get out there and vote. Remember, Setanta College is the place to go for your master's. If you want 10% off tuition, enter the code RS10, that's RS10. Rocky Snyder 10 is another way to look at it. In the meantime, we'll see you next week. Be sure to check out the website, rockysnyder.com, for more information about the upcoming workshop, June 15th and 16th, Capitola, California. It's game changer, I'm sure of you. We'll see you later.